He has not signed a single new free trade agreement anywhere on earth. Not one. It is time to go from all of these conversations to actually delivering real results, given that my plan sees us build new leverage that we can use to get those tariffs knocked down. The Americans don't have all of those minerals or the capacity to mine them. In the event that we're on the same side of a global conflict, and in the event that they provide us with tariff-free trade, then we're building up unbreakable leverage to get what we want. This is an example of how the worst tariffs imposed in Canada are imposed by our own government.
What do you say to Canadians, speaking of the Prime Minister Mark Carney that you mentioned, what do you say to Canadians who say, well, you know, Mark Carney is already looking at these priorities. He's talking about growth, he's talking about diversification, he's talking about industrial strategy. So what's different in your approach?
Well, you use the right verbs. He's looking at, he's talking about. And he has been looking and talking quite a lot over the last year. But here are the realities. He has not signed a single new free trade agreement anywhere on earth. Not one. We rushed through special powers under Bill C-5 for him to rapidly approve projects a year ago. How many has he approved under that process? 0. How many new pipelines are approved? 0. Interprovincial trade barriers remain. The only tax reform we've had is that he's renamed the carbon tax the clean fuel standard. So it is time to go from all of these conversations to actually delivering real results, given that it has now been a year.
What I take from your speech is that you're very calm. You have a very calm tone when it comes to talking about the United States. But Canadians are pretty angry about what's happening. So why aren't you angrier about this?
Well, because what would that do? Would that get the auto worker in Windsor working again? Would it allow people to put food on their table in Hamilton or the Sioux? We have to focus on what we can do and what we can control. That's all we can do. We can't control what the president has, and this is, by the way, something that Mark Carney has said, and I agree with him. He has said that we cannot control what the U.S. president says or does. We can control what we do on this side of the border in our own national interest. And by focusing on what we can control, then we can determine our own destiny. A year.
And how would your approach be different? What would you do differently?
On the domestic front, well, I'd make us stronger at home by immediately appealing the enormous spider web of federal regulations that block us from building. So I would repeal C-69, the anti-pipeline law. I would repeal the ban on shipping oil off the west coast of British Columbia. We have literally about 700 projects that are waiting for federal approval now. It means nothing to put 10 or 15 of them over to a new office, as the Prime Minister has done. I would remove the regulations for all those projects so that we can get everything built. I would eliminate the capital gains tax on anyone who reinvests money in Canada so that the $500 billion of investment that has gone south can come back tax-free to our country. Like I said, I would build up a strategic reserve of minerals so that we can use that as a dangle that as a negotiating chip when we come to the CUSMA review. I would basically focus on building up our strength so that we have unbreakable leverage facing down the Americans across the border.
Yeah. In order to get that tariff-free status.
That's right.
Because otherwise we are looking at tariffs on something, on a deal that we already negotiated to get free tariffs for. We gave up things to get to the free tariff status we are in a free trade deal.
Yes, exactly, and we shouldn't have to give up any more. And my plan sees us build new leverage that we can use to get those tariffs knocked down. That is, I think, the most pragmatic way, because ultimately, I mean, we know this president is not going to do anything for us to be nice. Mm-hmm. We have to have unbreakable leverage going into these talks, and the conservative approach is to build unbreakable leverage.
Did you see the news report that there is an Australian LNG ship that's going to discharge in St. John, New Brunswick? What do you think about that?
It makes me depressed. You think about this. We have 1,300 trillion cubic feet of natural gas, and yet we are importing gas from Australia. It's literally easier today to ship natural gas in liquid form from the other side of the world than it is to get it right here in Canada. This is an example of how the worst tariffs imposed in Canada are imposed by our own government. When we repeal C-69, we can pipe and frack and put that gas in liquefaction terminals that lower it to minus 61 degrees Celsius, liquefy. We can ship it all over the world in addition to supplying all of our needs here at home. Do you know natural gas goes for about $3 per million metric British thermal units, $3 in Canada, $11 in Europe, and $14 in Asia. So we could take something that's $3 here and sell it billions of times for 3 or 4 times the price overseas. The only thing standing in the way is the federal government. I'll get them out of the way.
I think you get applause on that one. And as you know, and maybe a lot of folks in the room don't know, that Canada has the only Pacific access. The United States refining capabilities are all in the Gulf of America. And as a result, they would have to go through the Panama Canal. And here, it's just free access right off the coast of British Columbia.
Well, speaking of our coast, we have the longest oceanic coastline of any country in the world. You know how many days it takes to ship to Asia from the BC coast? 11 days. You know how many days it takes to go from the Gulf? 20 days. Same is true for Europe. It takes half the time to ship from Canada to Asia and Europe as it takes from the U.S. Terminals on the southern tip of the U.S. We should be taking advantage of that. By the way, we also have cold weather, which means it's 25% cheaper to liquefy gas. And yet the Americans have built 8 terminals for liquefaction in the last decade. We've built 1. We got to get moving.
We got to get moving. You talked about something I think really interesting today, and that's the Strategic Mineral and Energy Reserve. Okay, tell me a little bit more about that, because that actually means that we're going to build a mine and processing in order to build the reserve. Is that right?
That's right.
Okay.
And we're looking at ways right now. Our shadow cabinet is building out a plan that could include a number of things like incentives for the private sector to build up these reserves and store them, price floors that will make it attractive, guaranteed minimum buying, so that there would be an incentive to accumulate the reserves. We have 10 of the 12 NATO-defined defense minerals that you would need in war. And if we have a reserve of those 10 minerals here in Canada, then every country in the world is going to want to be our friend. The Americans don't have all of those minerals or the capacity to mine them. If we were to make clear that these reserves will be kept on Canadian soil under Canadian lock and key, but that our allies would have access to them in the event that we're on the same side of a global conflict, and in the event that they provide us with tariff-free trade, then we're building up unbreakable leverage to get what we want.
So that's why you view it as a bargaining chip at the CUSMA table.
It's all about leverage.
You also mentioned a tariff-free auto pact. Now, auto pact is an old term. It's an old term that we used back in our original agreements with respect to the United States on autos. How is that different than just going back to the way we were pre-tariff CUSMA?
Well, the Americans have made it clear that they do not want Canada to become a backdoor entry point for China. They don't want Chinese vehicles, Chinese parts and steel and aluminum to make it through the funnel of a third country. And at the end of the day, we ultimately have to recognize that our auto industry requires integration with the United States of America. We are not going to be competitive otherwise. And right now, we're staring down the barrel of zero chance of getting back into the American market under the current trajectory. And so what I would say to the Americans is that we will keep Chinese automobiles out if you let Canadian automobiles in. So we leverage our interests and we get the access we need.
Explain again, if you wouldn't mind, the capital gain idea that you came up in the last election, because it was extremely popular, I have to say, and it caught a lot of traction.
Very simple. You sell an asset, you reinvest it in Canada, you pay no cap gains on it. And when you eventually fully dispose of the asset down the road, or after all of the sales, you eventually dispose of it, and you want to take the money and go on a cruise or something. At that point, you will pay your full capital gains obligation. So the government will get its pound of salt, But in the meantime, the capital can roll over and grow and grow and grow, opening factories, inventing technology, digging mines, building up our country, and we can reverse the terrible record we have on investment in this country by making it possible for capital to grow tax-free.
There's a lot of young people in the room today, Pierre. You attract a lot of young people, actually, through social media channels. I know my sons are big fans, and I know you got absolutely swarmed when you went to the Blue Jays games during the time. But there's a really big question here. I mean, they're working multiple jobs. They're seeing themselves taxed. They can't get into the housing market. There's a lot of frustration. So how are you going to address that? What are you keeping in mind?
Homes, jobs, hope. Start with homes. This is the first generation in our history that can't afford a home. And why? We have the fewest homes per capita of any country in the G7, even though we have by far the most land to build on. And the reason is that about, depending on the jurisdiction in Canada, a third to two-thirds of the cost of a new home is government. It's taxes or delays and other red tape. I would eliminate all taxes, all federal taxes on home building. I would incentivize municipalities to cut back on their development charges. They should not be charging anything more than is directly necessary for pipes, parks, and other infrastructure. I would do this to unlock a massive building boom of homes in our country. I would also, on the job side, look, we've got to get rid of the temporary foreign worker program outside of agriculture, which is effectively giving our young people's jobs over, are allowing multinationals to underpay our youth by hiring low-wage labor from abroad. Canadians should come first for Canadian jobs, and that's how we're going to get the wages up for our starter employment and get them into their homes.
And where's the hope come in?
In the first two. You got a job, you got a home, you can start a family, and that's a hopeful future.
Yeah, I agree. The second most popular question from the audience is, in business, you may dislike key customers, but you still treat them professionally. How would you handle that dynamic with Mr. Trump and the U.S. as our largest customer?
Well, I would do as Prime Minister Harper said. We should focus not on how we feel, but on what we have to do to adapt. Focus on what is within our control. At the end of the day, President Trump will be in the position for the next 3 years. We have a relationship with the United States of America that is centuries old, and it will survive centuries later. So we have to keep our mind on the long-term interest of our country and focus on the things that will protect the jobs and livelihoods of the people here in Canada.
Look, that relationship you talked about during your speech between the U.S. and Canada at the front end being more important, and it's going to last longer than what we're going through right now. You encouraged folks to reach across the border, and you encouraged them to talk. So what is the best path forward in making sure that the relationship is long-standing?
I think we need to very aggressively fight for Canada in the United States of America. We have to make the case to the American people about the enormous benefits that go to them by having us as their northern neighbor. And I think in making those arguments, the political incentive will be there for Congress and even the White House to take a position that is in our interest.
Thoughts? Any last minute thought you want to share with the audience vis-a-vis Donald Trump in the United States?
We have to fight for Canada, and that means focusing on the things that we can control. We have leverage. Let's not underestimate our strength. Let's build on that strength and use it to fight for our jobs, for our people, and most of all, for our country. Thank you very much.
Thank you.